to the third season of the Simply Verified Beef podcast. Once again, our theme for this season is trusted. For episode 2 this month, we're going to be talking about trusted visitors, and specifically biosecurity with a focus on bull sale and calving season. We know lots of our producers out there are already calving or maybe starting to think about calving season, but it's also a time of year when lots of us are out shopping for new herd bulls at bull sales. So it's a time when we're at elevated risk for bringing things back to the farm, but also knowing that things are most susceptible at home on the farm. So today for this episode, we've brought on 3 guests to chat about some things that producers can do to make sure we're being careful at this particularly vulnerable time for biosecurity. First, we've got Leigh Rosengren, the Chief Veterinary Officer for Canadian Cattle Association, Ed Pajor, who is the Director at WA Ranches of the University of Calgary, and Heidi Bennett, the Cow Boss and Activity Coordinator at WA Ranches. So we're going to be getting each of their unique perspectives on biosecurity issues during calving season and bull sale season, and also how VBP Plus can help. So I want to kind of go around the team for a little bit here to start with, and just get everyone to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and what your current role is. So maybe Leigh, we can start with you.
So I'm Leigh Rosengren, and I live in Southeast Saskatchewan. I'm a veterinarian, an epidemiologist, and recently a cow-calf producer, but currently we're exclusively a grain farm. My current role, I work with Canadian Cattle Association as their Chief Veterinary Officer, so helping them out with all things to do with animal health and care.
Awesome. And maybe Heidi, can you go next?
Yeah, I grew up on a cow-calf operation in Briscoe, BC, the Bugaboo Ranch, which is still operated by my family. And I took some ag courses in Olds College before I moved to the Cochrane area, which I have been in for 24 years in the ranching career. I met my husband, Johnny, at a ranch here, and we are raising a couple kids. We made the move over to WA Ranches of the University of Calgary 7 years ago. And here at the ranch, I'm the lead on the cattle, and I help Ed coordinate the research and teaching labs and outreach programs here at the ranch.
Perfect. And Ed, can you finish us off?
Sure, I'm Ed Pajor. I'm a professor of animal behavior and welfare at the University of Calgary in the Faculty of Vet Medicine. I also serve as the director for WA Ranches, and I'm in charge of academic and research activities at the ranch, as well as being involved with numerous outreach activities, both for the public, professionals, and youth.
I wanted to start off next with a question for Ed and Heidi, and just ask a little bit about what WA Ranches is and how it came to be.
Sure. WA Ranches is a 19,000 acre cow-calf operation. It's a commercial operation, primarily Black Angus. It was donated to the University of Calgary just over 5 years ago by Jack Anderson and his daughter Wynne Chisholm. They were looking at succession planning as they were thinking about what to do with the ranch that they built up over time, and realized that the University of Calgary did not have kind of research facilities or a research ranch available. So they decided to donate the ranch to the university. They had a few specific areas of interest in mind. Of course, vet medical education was a big one, but also research in animal care and welfare, as well as youth activities, were high on their agenda. The ranch is a donation to the University of Calgary, and the Faculty of Vet Medicine serves as stewards of that ranch.
Yeah, and what's unique about WA Ranches is that it stayed as a working cow-calf operation. So the teaching is quite authentic to what it is out in the industry, as is the research. So it's definitely an interesting place to be working. There's always a lot of activity and different tour groups coming to and through. You know, it makes ranching is an interesting job already, but the extra challenge with the university adds to that.
as you've been through vet school as well, if you want to jump in, just talking about the value that you see for students being able to come in on an actual working ranch.
Sure. The opportunity for students to go out and see the reality, not always pretty, not always contrived, but the reality of a working ranch, and to understand the lifestyle, the complexity of the decisions that producers are made, and the environment that cattle are raised in is really invaluable. You can learn all the theory in the classroom, but it's putting together that complex system that you can only see when you see a working ranch. And I think it really plays into our biosecurity conversation, because the thing you realize out on a working ranch is you can make a recommendation to change something without realizing it has 16 or 20 unintended consequences, because the system is so tightly connected. So I think such a fabulous opportunity for these students to get out and see WA ranches.
Yeah, that's a great segue actually into the next question that I wanted to pose to everybody. As you mentioned, biosecurity is really complicated. It's intertwined with all of the different decisions that we make on a ranch. So just wanted to go around the horn and see how each of you define biosecurity before we start talking about such a big topic.
Sure. For me, I guess biosecurity are the policies and procedures that you have in place that limit exposure to of animals to disease issues. So looking at animal health type of protocols that deal with on-farm activities such as mixing of animals and movement of animals, things that deal with how you limit visitors, and having visitors bring things to the ranch and exposing your animals to the ranch, and also things you do yourself as a rancher when it comes to your own activities and traveling to other locations, traveling to other ranchers. Do you have biosecurity protocols in place with the whole idea that what you're trying to do is maximize the health of the animal through some of these policies and procedures?
Yeah, I would agree with the biosecurity. Biosecurity is the prevention and control of disease, and that sounds like a pretty simple definition, but it's definitely bigger than that on a farmer ranch. It is a tall order to try and manage all the risks to your family, and people can catch diseases as well that animals carry, and to your livestock and the land as well. Cow-calf operations generally have a lot of access points. It's not like a chicken barn or a hog barn where it's an enclosed building and it's one door in or out. There's many gates and many ways that there's movement of these risks coming in, such as wildlife. It's pretty impossible to manage them coming in and out. As we know, wildlife can carry diseases that can get transferred to your livestock. And even, think of birds that can carry some invasive plant species in that you'll have to deal with. And as Ed mentioned, there's 19,000 acres of fence line that we potentially share with other cow herds. So trying to limit the contact to those herds, we could never buffer the fences to do that. So biosecurity on a ranch is definitely a big challenge, and something to take into account to help you control disease.
The only thing that I would add is, in addition to, as Ed said, policies and practices, I see biosecurity as a mindset, and or culture maybe is a better way to put it. We can think about it as complicated and maybe sort of contrived, this protocol that you write and you put away, but biosecurity really works best when we think about it as a daily practice, and it's a set of actions that you and your ranch commit to, hopefully that are simple and inexpensive and yet effective at protecting the health of your herd. And so we don't want to sort of oversimplify it to the point of making it wrong, but there's certainly different degrees of biosecurity that we can implement on the farm. And it's really that mindset and a culture that we talk about amongst everybody who's working on the operation.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I mean, because that really does relate to not just having, policies and procedures in place, but it's actually doing them and following them and, embracing them.
I think that's a really great way to put it. I'm wondering next if we can jump into maybe a question for Leigh to start off with. But we talked about with Heidi's response what biosecurity can look like on a cow-calf operation and how that differs from, say, a barn setting with poultry or hogs. But what are the main biosecurity risk categories for a beef cattle operation?
Well, Emma, I like to break it down into three big buckets. There's the risk of things coming on, so then that ties to the activity of keeping disease out. There's the risk of disease spreading within your herd, and there's the risk of something that's within your herd spreading beyond your herd boundary, so being a good neighbor. So when I think of the big categories where we have room to make an impact on those, it's animal isolation, it's sanitation, animal movements, herd health, and then the program management, the saying what you'll do and doing what you say.
Ed and Heidi, I wanted to go to you next and just chat a little bit about why biosecurity is important to you at WA Ranches. And obviously, you're in a unique situation in being a working ranch, but also having students come on. So if you could chat about what biosecurity looks like to you at WA and why it's important.
So maybe I'll just start off from more of the teaching, research, kind of visitors approach. I mean, of course, we're very interested in making sure our animals are healthy, we don't transmit disease. And so that in general is why biosecurity is important. But we do have a number of procedures in place where we ask our visitors, ask our students, et cetera, to follow certain biosecurity procedures, such as, clean clothing, clean boots, clean instrumentation, try to use ranch vehicles, Kubotas, those types of things when they're going out to different pastures if, for example, they're doing research in any particular area, sanitization of equipment. When we have tour groups come in, we will often have them do things like, scrub boots or put on booties. And we also make sure that we have some some records of where they are going and what they are going to see and what they are going to do. Are they going to actually be in contact with animals or in pastures with animals, and also get information on their own background. When's the last time they themselves were in contact with animals? When was the last time they were out of the country? Those types of things. And so that's just from the academic and research perspective. And I'll just turn it over to Heidi to talk about the on the farm importance of biosecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll speak more to the cow-calf producer, I suppose, in the importance of biosecurity. It is for the production of our beef. That's the purpose of a cow-calf operation, is to grow beef. And so biosecurity plans can help to keep your animals healthy. And that's with a good health protocol, like keeping your vaccinations up. If you keep your own herd healthy, if they are exposed to some diseases, it potentially won't spread through your herd, etc. And having some different management systems as well to move your herd around is important there too. And managing these risks, your biosecurity risks, can minimize illness and disease. So it's easier to prevent a disease than it is to treat it. There's a lot of loss in revenue if you have a disease outbreak. We look at calf mortalities, and my math tells me that there's not a lot of money in a dead animal, right? And the cost of treating a sick animal can be very high. If you think of the labor involved and antibiotics, if they need electrolytes or IV fluids, and your vet bills can add up quickly. Also, if they make it through the illness, if you heal them up, there's a big loss of gain too. A calf that's had scours will generally weigh 30 pounds less in the fall, and a calf with pneumonia is 60 pounds less. So you're losing some money there, even if you have saved the animals. So, the best practice here is to prevent these illnesses, and using some of the biosecurity methods is definitely a way to do that.
That's very helpful, Heidi. I love how you put that into, dollars and cents terms. I know that's often how our producers think about things, and being able to kind of compare the cost of not having biosecurity protocols in place to maybe the effort or time to put them into place is really great reference points. Leigh, I wanted to jump to you next, and chat about the impact that individual producers have on biosecurity risk. So, we've talked about risks about bringing things into your own operation, but there's also that bigger picture that you mentioned about not transmitting disease to other operations that you might be visiting. And sometimes I think it can be hard for producers to visualize, what impact they really have with their own individual biosecurity practices. Can you chat about what the importance is of each person doing something on their own operation?
Absolutely. What a beautiful question, and it dovetails exactly with what Heidi was just saying. When we think about biosecurity, it's really a win-win. It's helping those practices and procedures that we talked about are helping protect the health of your herd today and your bottom line, while at the same time, contributing to the greater good of our national biosecurity. So we practice biosecurity at lots of different levels. There's import restrictions at the border. There's other border controls to try and talk to people who've been in foreign countries and things like that. And then we replicate those at the farm gate, which is sort of our second line of defense. I think I'd be amiss to have a conversation about biosecurity and not mention foot and mouth disease, because it is the one threat that keeps most of us up at night, and that we really want to emphasize our biosecurity practices to mitigate that risk. If foot and mouth disease were ever to enter Canada, our borders would close, our business continuity would be severely impacted, and frankly, the value of our investment in our stock would plummet. And so individual producers, by protecting their own herd, are also protecting that bigger collective industry value. And I think you're right, it's hard for producers to sort of draw those parallels, but vigilance on the farm of the signs and symptoms of diseases are important, but more importantly, it's producers just need to know what isn't normal, and to have the confidence to pick up the phone when something isn't normal. And then at the same time, they can invest in our national biosecurity by really having an understanding of what that very high level, or as I like to call it, code orange biosecurity would be if foot and mouth disease were ever to enter our continent or be nearby, and so that they could consider preparedness for that. But, our producers do play a critical part in our national biosecurity and ensuring that we remain the high health country that we are, which gives us a highly preferential trade status compared to most of the world.
Thanks, Leigh. I think that's a great analogy to use FMD and to really talk about, the bigger picture and the impact of biosecurity on our whole industry. So appreciate you bringing that up. Obviously, we've understood now biosecurity is a very big topic. There's a lot of factors involved, and we could probably spend many podcast episodes, maybe even a whole season, on biosecurity practices. So today we wanted to focus just on biosecurity during bull sale season, which overlaps with calving season, and try to talk about some of the risks and things that we can do to mitigate those during this time specifically. So starting to lean a little bit more into that specifically, I wanted to ask you all what individual producers can do to minimize biosecurity risks from visitors on the farm. So focusing specifically on the people side of things.
Well, I think I've already mentioned, mentioned some of the things to do in terms of trying to minimize transmission by clean clothing, washing boots, and even washing vehicles and things like that if you're having them coming onto your ranch, especially going out into some of the pastures and things like that. So I think I'll just turn it over to Heidi to talk maybe a little bit more from her perspective.
Yeah, I think the one thing I thought of that you didn't mention, Ed, was just locking some of your access points. Locking your gates will keep most people out. And if they see that lock on there, they know it's not they can't just drive through your pastures and into your cattle. And it might seem unfriendly to have a security gate at the entrance. I know that there's been several gates put up at some of our neighbors and ranches, and maybe they don't realize that it's part of biosecurity. That it's more for the theft and vandalism that's been occurring on rural properties. But it could be a way that you control the people in and out is locking your gates and your pastures.
I think the other thing, maybe just to add a little bit, is to understand your visitor as well, like what kind of risk the visitor is themselves. Are they someone that is hauling dead animals around, or working with sick animals, or has been in areas of the world where there might be foot and mouth disease and recently and things like that. So you can kind of evaluate how risky the visitor themselves might be. I think the other thing to do is that on a ranch, it's very difficult to keep everybody out and keep everything clean, but you can actually designate areas where there's kind of different levels of risk. So you can have dirty areas and areas that you allow people to drive their trucks in and through and whatnot. They're going down to the machine shop or someplace like that. They're not going out near cattle. The need may not be quite as large there to ask them to wash their trucks, but if they're going out into your calving pastures and those types of things, it might be an area that you might say, well, let's take our own farm truck, or let's wash. If you really have to take your own vehicle out there, let's wash it down and make sure we've got clean boots on and things like that. So, for example, going into a calving field with young cows just being born, you might take a different level of biosecurity, a higher level of biosecurity practices in place, rather than it might be someplace where they may still be on the ranch, but not near any animals.
Great. And Leigh, from your perspective, some quick practices that producers can take to mitigate risks from visitors.
Well, just a couple. One thing is just posting signage, and it can, I've driven by more and more operations where there's signs at the end of the road or at the entrance to the pasture says biosecure area, and possibly a couple of expectations or points. That can certainly set the tone when visitors are coming. And I think that leads me just into a comment about the culture of biosecurity. So a lot of us struggle to enforce biosecurity on our ranches because we're worried about being culturally off tone, right? Asking somebody to wear booties or suggesting that they might be a problem by coming to visit the ranch. And that really goes very counter to that, that welcoming rural culture that we all embrace. But I would just encourage people to, find ways to open that conversation either immediately on arrival or even better before people come, so that the conversation about your expectations is easier. And I would also just encourage producers to not feel like they need to know everything and be able to explain and justify every ask that they're doing. I think simply saying this puts my livelihood at risk is more than enough for asking people to do some of these very simple things that Ed and Heidi have highlighted.
Thanks for bringing that up, Leigh. I think that's a challenge that, folks that aren't sure how to implement biosecurity on a cow-calf operation in particular tend to find as an obstacle. It's counterintuitive to how we normally view interactions in rural areas and in the beef industry in particular. So I appreciate your comment about, the culture of it and how you can approach the communication side and not just the protocols on the farm. I want to jump next into a question for Ed and Heidi. So WA Ranches is certified with Verified Beef Production Plus. And I just want to ask how getting VBP Plus certified changed your approach to biosecurity, if it did. Did it help you make changes at the ranch, or reinforce anything? You know, how did the certification process kind of impact how you viewed biosecurity?
Yeah, Emma, I've recently did the audit for verified beef production plus last year, and this was kind of my first introduction to the manual. And I've kind of learned what a great resource and reference it is for really any ranch. It's very thorough, and it talks about all the things that cow-calf operators should think about. And it really did help to reinforce some of the protocols that we had in place, including having me improve the signage, which Leigh talked about as well. For visitors coming in, we have, you know, 3 main yards that people come to, and it wasn't always clear as to where they should park. So, you know, we made some signage for like a muster point. This is where you wait for your ranch contact person to come and get you, and then, you know, hop in a ranch vehicle from there. So definitely helped us in that aspect, as well as with our veterinarian. I asked them to help me add some tips on cleaning to our herd health protocol book, just on cleanliness and the importance of it, cleaning your equipment and how to do so. How to use Viricon disinfectant on your tubing bags that you use from time to time. Go through and do a thorough cleaning and let them dry. So that was something that came out of the manual, as well as looking for these unusual diseases and illness. Like Leigh also talked about, like the foot and mouth disease. You know, we wouldn't really know what that looks like, but our vet had us at the calving meeting look at some of these diseases, and just be aware that some of these diseases too can be very harmful to humans, and how important it is for us to clean and wash our hands more often. Sometimes we get in a rush and think that we don't have time for that, but it really only takes a few minutes to do these things. As well, I found in the manuals the importance of record keeping and keeping track of your health in your herd. We've got a really great system that we're going to continue doing. So the manual just really did help to reiterate that we are taking some positive steps, but gave us a few tips as well.
Yeah, I don't really think I have very much to add beyond what Heidi has said. Except, you know, I am a big fan of these types of programs, because with something like an assessment that's done, it allows you to kind of benchmark yourself, see where you are, see what you could be doing better. And someone said you can't manage what you don't measure, and this kind of sets some measures and benchmark for your own ranch that you can come back to and check and see how you're improving in the future, because everybody wants to do better. That's just the nature of ranching.
Great. Next question I wanted to jump into, we've alluded to it a little bit in terms of different risk areas on the farm and what compose higher risks in terms of biosecurity. And of course, again, the focus being on bull sale and calving season. So I wanted to pose the question to anybody that wants to jump in and just ask why calving is a different time of year in terms of biosecurity than any other time.
I'll jump in, Emma. I think calving season is such a critical time of year. It's what sets us up for our production for the entire year. We have neonates that have a different immune system than our mature cattle. And as well, we have cows that might be at a higher risk for exposure and catching a disease because of the biological pressures of calving. And so we've got what I would categorize as high risk or highly susceptible animals. It's also a time of year when in some operations, animals are coming onto the farm if you're buying breds close to calving, and so that can create a risk. And of course, for anybody who still calves sort of in the more traditional yard setting, we get that concentration and crowding, which can really amplify disease pressures. So we need to be thinking about calving season because we're creating risks, because the biology is different. And, you know, the way I've always looked at it is we double the population and quadruple the workload. So if you haven't thought through ahead of time what you're going to do to protect that herd, you're certainly not going to be thinking about during calving. It really pays to be proactive ahead of time and set those policies and procedures up in place and how you're going to do them, because you simply don't have time to think about it in the heat of the moment on a good year, let alone a year when you're dealing with a scours outbreak or a pneumonia problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say exactly the same thing, Leigh, that you covered there, that calving season is one of the more high risk time of the year, because you are dealing with these vulnerable young animals that you know, if they do get their colostrum intake and everything, they still have the risk of catching these diseases, because they are, you know, generally more closely confined. Even if you are calving on a pasture setting like we are and not bringing our cattle into the barn, there's just more mingling, you know, at the feeding sites, like at our bunks and at our bedding and shelter areas as well. And those are great areas for pathogens to spread from animal to animal. As well, for our operation, we have more staff coming in as well, and there's more human movement through the cattle. And you know, as much as we ask them to stay clean and tidy, it, you know, again, you get busy. Like Leigh said, it's a busy time of year, and you're trying to save every calf, and you might try to take a shortcut there, and not think about where you've been, and if you have been treating a sick calf, to clean up before you head to the maternity barn. So yeah, I definitely feel calving season is probably the most important time of the year to think about these biosecurity systems.
I love that you both brought up the human side of it, and, you know, the planning that it takes to prepare for biosecurity, and not just the, you know, the risk of having newborn calves on the operation, but also, you know, how busy that time can come and kind of pose a different sort of risk to biosecurity. I want to jump next into a question for Ed and Heidi, just to give the listeners a bit of a picture of what calving looks like at WA. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about when you calve, what the setup looks like, what kind of help you've got, what sort of systems and protocols you use.
We start calving at the end of April, and it's a 60-day season. We calve this time of year just to try and take the weather factor out of it, because we don't want to bring our cattle in. We want them to kind of calve out in a pasture and mother up, and not be disturbed, as you would need to do if you were calving in the colder seasons or colder months. We breed our heifers the same as our mature cows. We don't want to lengthen our calving season any longer. We also try and keep some pressure off our calving fields or calving pastures here at the main yard. So we leave part of our herd at the other end of the ranch. And these ones are ones that have been preg checked to start calving at the last cycle, or they were bred at the last cycle of breeding, and we consider these our late calvers. So about 100 to 200 head stay up there, and then the rest of the herd comes home to the main ranch, and we divide them into 3 different groups. We've got our bred heifers, which are closest to our calving barn. We've got our thinner kind of cows in a smaller group, and then we've got our big, strong, mature cows in a group as well. And from there, we sort of manage it in the Sandhills calving system. So the basic principle of this is that every 2 weeks, we will move our pregnant cows into a new and clean pasture, and we will leave those pairs that have calved in those fields behind. So what this does is kind of segregates our calves to be the same age. And so those calves won't be shedding any of their pathogens onto any newborn calves who, as we know, are quite susceptible to picking them up because their immunities are still low as they're not born with those. So doing this method, it keeps the cows that are calving on fresh ground. So it's like you're restarting your calving season every 2 weeks. And we do this with all 3 groups, kind of rotating the days that we need to move our pregnants out. And we have seen a change in the treatment rates since we've started implementing this management plan. And what is also neat about this is you have the option, if you do have an outbreak in one of these calving fields early, before the 2 weeks, you can decide to just move the pregnant cows out of there and kind of make that size of calves that have the exposure smaller, which can help if you are getting an outbreak. So by the end of May, most of them have calved out here, and we will haul the remaining pregnant ones up to the late calver groups. And I definitely feel like this calving management really ties into sort of biosecurity controls that help prevent disease and its spread. So that's sort of that's what our calving sort of looks like. And I guess it's coming up sooner than I think, but when we have a good plan like this in place, you kind of have a bit of confidence that you've got a backup plan if things do go south.
I want to dive a little bit deeper into that system specifically. So some of the concerns that I've heard from producers before with it is just worrying about the amount of ground or the amount of pens that you would need to kind of make it work. So between Heidi and Leigh, and maybe Ed too, if you have anything to add, any tips for producers that are maybe worried about space or infrastructure and how they could implement some of the principles of the Sandhills system without needing to do it at a big scale?
We were lucky at WA that we had a lot of different paddocks already pre-set up. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, would be, a lot of folks don't have enough water systems to move into this way. So there might be a little bit of a cost to do it, but I can tell you that the cost involved in making some of these changes and trying to do so, it is worth it when you don't have an outbreak of disease.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Emma, is that you're right. We read about things like the Sandhills calving system. It sounds great on paper, and then we throw our hands up in despair and say, there's no way I can make that work on my operation. So a lot of it is going back to the principles of what you're trying to achieve. And, we talked at the beginning, what are some of the fundamentals of biosecurity? Well, isolation, sanitation, and movement were 3 of the key principles. So Heidi's described the calving process, textbook, which if you've got the facilities, that's great. But even thinking, how can I create groups of animals on my operation that are of a like immune status based on age? How can I, when I do my chores, go from my lowest risk animals that for having disease, highest risk for catching it, start with them, and at the end of the day, do my chores with those animals that are most likely to be infected when I'm going to go wash my boots? And how can I think about moving animals around on the farm? I calved in a traditional yard setup, February calving, right? So we're not calving on grass, but even then, you could think about not doing what my father-in-law would term recreational sorting, keeping animals in certain cohorts so that if one does get sick, you've got them segregated. So I think that Sandhills system, while it works beautiful if you've got an operation it fits on, there's lots of those principles that can be applied in all sorts of calving operations. We just need to think about them creatively.
Thanks, Leigh. I think that helps kind of define what goes into the Sandhills system and the sort of philosophy and mindset behind it. And appreciate, Heidi, the value of infrastructure too. So trying out those principles can maybe give you some ideas as to how you could change infrastructure to make it work, and totally appreciate how much it could pay off. I want to jump next onto the bull sale side of our conversation. So we've talked about WA's calving season, and it doesn't necessarily align with peak bull sale time, but for a lot of producers who are calving, January, February, and even into March, that aligns with calving time when it's super high risk. And bull sale season is a time when we're going and visiting other operations and potentially introducing risks back to our own. So a question for all of you is, what can producers do to minimize the risk to their own operation when they're out shopping for seed stock?
Well, I can jump in here, and Heidi and Ed can certainly add on, but one of the easy and obvious ones is online bull sales, but there's times when we do want to go and see those bulls in person and in flesh. And so at times like that, going back to some of the fundamentals that Ed talked about, so dedicate a set of going to bull sale clothing and boots. Don't wear those boots back around your own stock. Make sure that you've, got your chore boots for the farm and you're going to town boots. Think about things as simple as the floor mats in your truck. Make sure they're rubber, and then you can wash them after you get home, and you're not sort of potentially having that site of contamination. I think it was Heidi that mentioned Virkon. So talk to your veterinarian about different disinfectants, and recognize that when you're going to deal with those clothes in your vehicle, that there's 3 steps. There's cleaning, which involves hot water and soap and getting rid of organic matter. There's sanitizing or disinfecting, which is things like your Virkon or your bleach. And then one of the most valuable steps that we often skip is downtime, where that article gets a chance to fully dry, because so many of our microorganisms can't actually survive without heat and moisture. So lots of steps that we can take ahead of buying the stock. And then, of course, if we want to get into it, steps that you can take after you're going to bring that bull home.
I guess that what I would add to what Leigh said there is if you do go to a seed stock producer's farm, just try not to go to their calving facilities if it's not required. You kind of eliminate that place for transferring your manure, and of course wearing your town boots is a good idea. You don't want to bring your crap to the bull sale, right? And you don't want to take that home either. I guess if I want to chat a little bit about when you do bring your new cattle home, I think it is important to quarantine them. And we do a 21-day quarantine, up to 30 days. And we like to watch these cattle for some illness, keep an eye on them in that time frame. And we also do booster their vaccinations and warmer as well. We buy our cattle from reputable producers that have a strong herd health protocol, but sometimes you don't know when they were vaccinated and if it's going to be more than a year till they get boosted again. We just like to booster them, and then we know. So that would be, another tip there about protecting your herd.
Great. So to flip things to the other side of the coin, for folks that are selling seed stock, we've talked a little bit about, the culture of rural communities and sort of wanting to be inviting for visitors. And obviously production sales, but also even private treaty sales rely a lot on relationships and customer service. So what are some things that producers can do that are selling seed stock to be practical about biosecurity and, wanting to worry about the risks on their own operation while trying to maintain that welcoming atmosphere for visitors?
You're right. This can feel awkward and this can feel challenging, but I also think it's an opportunity for seed stock producers to set themselves apart. And it's a little bit in how we present it, in that every customer who's buying seed stock from you wants them to be healthy. So promoting all of those practices that you do, your vaccination, any testing, potentially offering to them to have a vet-to-vet conversation about any health concerns they might have, all of that really promotes the importance that you're placing on it. And obviously, if you're VVP plus certified, you know, that sign at the end of the driveway. And I think that by doing that, by promoting that health aspect of your herd, it then opens the opportunity for you to make those same asks that we talked about of other visitors about, you know, cleanliness, what kind of boots they're wearing, and making them aware ahead of time of those expectations. So certainly not always the easiest conversation, but I do think that the culture is changing and more people are coming to expect and look for that.
Yes, I agree completely with Leigh on that. You know, we shouldn't feel like it's unwelcoming to ask someone to use a boot dip or leave a vehicle in the yard, not when, you know, they're protecting what they've built up for likely years and years. It's about them protecting their investment, and we should be supporting them as well. And we should kind of pick those sources that have these biosecurity implementations in place. It's like they're protecting their program, which means that you will protect your program as well. If you think about how devastating it would be if you had to destroy your herd that got a disease, you would feel pretty bad if you knew it was something that maybe could have been prevented if you had used some of these steps. So definitely, you know, protect your program.
Great points. Thank you both. We've chatted a little bit in reference to what Ed mentioned about some of WA's protocols in terms of international travel, especially recently. And Leigh mentioned FMD as well. So maybe between the two of you, if you want to chat a little bit about some of the things that producers can do if they're traveling internationally, whether that's to go shopping for seed stock or, you know, on beef business travel or otherwise.
Well, you know, we've already talked a lot about taking your town boots to town, and I actually know people who travel quite internationally, and they will actually leave their, you know, have a pair of boots or a cheap pair of boots, and they'll actually leave them in the other country before coming back home, for example. I think one of the most, you know, I'm sure Leigh has a lot better practical examples, but I'm going to jump on her phrase of culture of biosecurity. I mean, if you develop that culture yourself for your own ranch, it's a culture of biosecurity you take with you when you go to other places as well. That culture of you know, not bringing things back with you and making sure wherever you go, you treat the locations you're going to with the same type of respect you would expect on your own ranch. So the practical things that really come to mind again are those clean clothing, clean boots, the limiting the exposure of that material you're wearing to your own ranch when you get back. And I'll turn over to Leigh.
Thanks, Ed. So let's put ourselves in the situation where we're traveling internationally. We're in a country that has a different health status than Canada, and we are there to see livestock. You know, in those situations, don't have any unnecessary animal contact. So there's going to be times where it's necessary to have contact, but at other times, simply looking from the tour bus or from the vehicle is equally valuable. And so anytime you can mitigate that risk, do so. And if you are having livestock contact, think about what you're taking. So do you really need your purse? Do you really need your cell phone? Do you really want that, whatever it is, extra jacket? Because all of those things become items that you're going to then have to deal with before you come home. Traveling with Ziploc bags, large Ziploc bags, so that when you get home from the tour, you can put that t-shirt or those socks or shoes directly into the Ziploc bag and not sort of spread that around your hotel room. And in foreign countries, a lot of hotels will offer dry cleaning or laundering service. So just get that laundry done over there before you even come home. So, you know, they're little things, but biosecurity, we often liken it to a block of Swiss cheese. And, you know, there's holes in it everywhere, but the more layers you put on, the more likely you are to cover that risk off somewhere. The other points that I would just throw in there are, of course, always declare to border services when you return, that you've been on a farm or returning from a farm. And we do recommend avoiding contact with susceptible stock in Canada after you return. So a couple of extra points to add to that.
Great, thank you. I think that's always a good one to touch on in terms of international travel. We think a lot about our own operations, but when we go on vacation, that's our time to stop thinking about them. So it's important to remember those things when we're traveling abroad as well. I want to finish off with a couple questions about just your experiences with biosecurity and the things that you all have learned through firsthand experience. So the first of those questions would be, do you have any real life examples of when biosecurity on the farm has been successful, or if a protocol has failed, and what you could do in that situation to improve it?
I think so on the successful side of things, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think it's one of those questions that sometimes you don't really know when you're being successful unless you're tracking things on your own ranch. If you have a good, successful biosecurity program in place, then your animals are healthy and performing well and growing well, etc. I think sometimes I don't have any specific examples of biosecurity failures, but I think sometimes when we don't pay attention to some of the things like commingling animals or having people move through sick animals or having animals that go through a barn that are sick, and then other animals come through and not being sure that they were sick, then you end up with some outbreaks. And I think I think Heidi has a little more personal experiences with an outbreak or two, so I'll turn it over to her.
Yes, Ed, I have definitely been involved with a very, very bad health outbreak in a herd, very nasty scours outbreak, and it was very hard to contain, and it was affecting, from a day-old to a week-old calf. And it was quite a hard and devastating time for us, especially when you put 9 months into this cow to have this calf, to have it go down that way. It's very hard on a ranch hand and the staff's morale, right? So we were calving during the cold weather, and everything had to come through the barn, and we didn't have really any options as to where to go with these calves. We had to go to the same barn as the sick calves were coming. So it made me think a lot about the movement of cattle and the movement of people. And again, I know I'm probably repeating myself here again, but it's a really important point that people are a big factor in spreading the disease. And I mean, we were washing, but we weren't really disinfecting, and we weren't really thinking of our boots or our coveralls or our gloves. We weren't really thinking about stripping those stalls right down and disinfecting those. We weren't thinking about separate equipment for sick calves and newborn calves. We were using the same ones. And, in the end, we had some advice from some vets, and they helped us set up kind of a quarantine barn for the sick cows. We went to a totally different location, and we also, with their help, found that there was a vaccine for this type of scour. So it's important to work with your vet to update and review your protocols annually, because maybe this is something that you maybe could have prevented. So it really opened my eyes to what an illness can do to a herd, because up till this point it seemed manageable. It seemed like it wasn't too bad, and you just kind of dealt with it and went with the program. But this totally changed the way we manage things, and I have used that experience to where I am now. And we have a quarantine barn if we do get sick calves. That's way away from the rest of the herd. And I even have a separate office for my sick calf equipment to my newborn equipment. I am very lucky to have that sort of facility here at the ranch, but I think this is a reason why we work so hard here at the WA to try and prevent these illnesses, because it is easier to prevent than to deal with a sickness like this. And so biosecurity is it can help you. It's a huge help to your system.
So I think it's one of those things where, Emma, your question was like a biosecurity protocol that had failed, but this was more an example of, things have been going very well at this particular ranch, and then the lack of those biosecurity protocols kind of created this unusual outbreak situation. And one of the things I would say is having someone like Heidi with as much experience as she has with cow calving systems. For 20 plus years, she's seen the whole growth of the whole concern over biosecurity and is really doing a fantastic job for us at WA.
I really appreciate your point too, that, we don't often think about success at biosecurity. Success is when we're not having problems. So I think it's a good reminder to measure some of those things that can indicate when things are going well, so that we can determine that we're successful before an outbreak happens. Last question that I wanted to finish off with was just to give everybody a last chance to throw in any words of wisdom or other thoughts that have come to mind for producers that are looking to evaluate their own biosecurity practices, and maybe put a protocol in place or improve something that they already have going on.
Well, I guess one thing I would add is that when I'm talking with producers, I often ask them to use their imagination and think of biosecurity like they do about fencing. Um, when you think of fencing, there's times where you need a double fence at the perimeter between you and your neighbors, and there's other times where a single electric string will do the deal and, keep those cows out of the next paddock. So we are trying to, there's 3 steps. We're trying to keep disease out, we're trying to keep disease from spreading, and we're trying to keep disease that might be on our operation from affecting others. And so if we can think about it like fencing, there's a cost to building it and there's a cost to maintaining it, but we also need to then look at the potential consequences for not having those good fences.
I think that's a great metaphor to finish off with. So thanks to all 3 of you. I really appreciate you joining us today to shed some words of wisdom and some light on biosecurity. It can be a really intimidating topic, and I really appreciate all of you bringing your experience to the table and trying to make it a little bit more accessible and manageable to the producers that listen. So thanks to all 3 of you. That's it for season 3, episode 2 of the Simply Verified Beef podcast. Be sure to join us next month for the next episode in the theme of trusted.